all of you to this beautiful day. I suppose all of you are aware of what the message is going to be about. I'd like to talk about children, and several things that brought this to my mind are from various things. Just one, probably the main thing, is just to seeing so many young families here raising your children. It's a real, I enjoy seeing it. Maybe fun isn't a very good word to use in this place. More fun to watch it after you've been through it. But I know I've forgotten some of the difficulties and the challenges that come through that. The nitty-gritty stuff, but it is still it's a great privilege that we have and a heavy responsibility to raise the children in our care. The largest part of the message is toward parents, but I'm also thinking of anyone who is caring for children. School teachers, even Sunday school teachers, grandparents, aunts and uncles, and friends of parents and children. The last month or two, along with seeing the children and the parents here in church, there are several other inputs that I'd like to draw from for today's message. And one is especially the way that you children helped the other night, Friday night, at the fish fry. That was just amazing to watch and to see. I just love it. It's really a blessing to see all of you just pitch in and do what you can. And thank you for doing that. Then some of the others are, one is an article in the Faith Builders newsletter. And I never remember, does that come here in the mailboxes? Everyone get that? So if you didn't read it. But if you didn't read it, it'll be coming out in the Calvary Messenger here in a month or two. That's about, it's more from a school perspective, but not really, as written by Linnell Nisley. And then there's another magazine, church magazine, that I get. It's called The Remnant. And there's an article in there by Cheryl Zizet, and that really impressed me as she talked about her mother and Cheryl's own experience as a mother. And then Susan Slaybaught's articles in the Calvary Messenger about, it's two women, and I know men shouldn't read that, right? But I have to since I'm the editor. How many of you, maybe I should say, how many of you don't know Delbert and Susan? Raise your hand. Because we have people here who, Delbert's been going for quite a while. So Susan is Neoma's cousin, and Delbert's lived here. He was a pastor in the church they lived here for a long time, seemed like it. And she writes about, the last one was about show and tell, and I'll talk about that more. So one thing I liked about reading those articles was it gives me it's from a perspective of a mother or a woman at the least, and some of it is from a parent's perspective, some of it is from a school teacher's perspective, and but they give a perspective on children and family that I obviously don't possess, and the title comes from a reference in one of those articles. So I'm going to begin by reading the opening paragraph from Cheryl Zizet's article. I stepped quietly down the stairs, my eyes groggy. It was midnight, and a soft light glowed from my parents' room. My new baby brother was crying, probably what had woken me up at this hour. and I decided to check on Mom and wee baby. My mother was picking him up, crooning softly. I expected her to look weary. Instead, her eyes were sparkling with delight as she exclaimed, "Oh, he's just hungry." She settled into the rocking chair, and soon the house was restored to its midnight quiet. Her joy at getting up in the middle of the night to feed her baby made a deep impression on my 18-year-old mind. She gave me the unspoken message that this baby was wanted and loved, and she found deep delight in caring for him. This was her 9th baby, and I had often seen this in my mother. But this time, it felt extra special. It's that last sentence that still just wipes me out. And please don't hear this as a call for you to have 9 children. I'm not asking that at all. But if you as parents, both of you, can be thrilled like this in caring for your 9th child, as they likely cared for their 8 children, God bless you. With bringing souls into this world comes a great responsibility to nurture them until they leave our care. I'd like to begin with, not that one. I guess the verse is on here. Lo, children are an heritage of the Lord. And in one of these articles, I guess Cheryl's article, she talked about children are an heritage of the Lord. A heritage is something that we don't heritage. We got our heritage from our parents. It's something that you could also say an inheritance, but heritage almost includes something more than just from your parents. But a heritage is a property that descends to an heir, and is something transmitted by or acquired from a predecessor. In other words, it's not something you worked for, it's not something you did or made on your own. Children are an heritage from the Lord. God gives us children. God brings children into this world. Now, admittedly, parents are how they get here. But it's not something that parents could try to do and make happen if God wouldn't have given this gift to mankind. Obviously, none of us would be here. So, okay, y'all want to look at this a little bit. So thank you for sending these pictures, and we're going to look at them a little bit toward the end too. But I got, most of these were from parents, but I also got some from grandparents. I reached out to grandparents, and you know grandparents have lots of pictures from the grandchildren. And so then I saw some pictures on Instagram or Facebook about the school field trip, so there's some on there too, and I thought that appropriate. So if I was looking specifically for pictures from grade 3 on down to infants, and I apologize if I missed anyone. There are a few repeats, and but thank you for sending them, because you'd be really bored if all I'd have would be pictures of my grandchildren. So it's just I just love doing this. I spent a lot of time, but I think I got some of the names for some of you children, and hopefully I can remember them. So thanks for sending them, and it's just, children are just, well, the world would die without them. So I'm grateful for all of these children here in our congregation. So a heritage is something, I'd like to specifically think of a spiritual heritage or a blessing or a gift from God. That's what children are. They are a gift from God. And Adam said after Cain was born, "I have gotten a man from the Lord." Cain came from God. And then in Genesis 33:5, After when Jacob was heading back to Canaan, and he met Esau, and here the two met. And Esau lifted up his eyes and saw the women and the children and said, "Who are those with thee?" And Jacob said, "The children which God hath graciously given thy servant." Jacob recognized that they were gifts from God. They weren't just his own doings. Let's just say that. So another part of the heritage, the children as an heritage, is just the fact that they're fearfully and wonderfully made. And the verses in Psalm 139, I'd like just to read those. "For thou hast possessed my reins, thou hast covered me in my mother's womb. I will praise thee, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Marvelous are thy works, and that my soul knoweth right well. My substance was not hid from thee when I was made in secret, and curiously wrought in the lowest parts of the earth. Thine eyes did see my substance, yet being unperfect. And in thy book all my members were written, which in continuance were fashioned, when as yet there was none of them." God made us fearful. We're fearfully and wonderfully made. And a certain part of that is we are all different. You know, if you have children, you know that your children aren't all the same. And if you don't have children, you compare yourself with your siblings. Or if you see sometimes you look at families and you look at the siblings, and there are two brothers and they're just as different as night and day. And so some twins are a lot alike. So Josh, I don't know. Yeah. Seems like you and Joe are a lot alike, but probably some differences between you. My boss has a set of twins, and they're not identical, and he just says they are so different, and they are very different. But children are different. It's because God made us with our own particular personalities. And as parents, one of the biggest challenges, I think, one big challenge is to look at each of those children as a unique person. And this statement from Linnell Nisley is just a very powerful one. Because one of the most loving things you can do for the children in your care, and she wasn't just talking about parents, she was talking about other people, is to know them fully as God created them. Few things will have as much eternal impact as the imprint you leave on this child's soul. And that's my plea to all of us today. And no matter where we are, we're going to have an impact on children's lives. And we should seek to make that imprint a positive one, because it will make an imprint, will have an eternal effect on their lives. Okay, A Joyful Calling, and that's the title of Cheryl Zeisetz's article. And I like to look at nurture and ministry. She talked some about the tension she's felt already in her life as a mother, and she just sometimes felt like I need to. All my work in the house was done with his subconscious. I'll get this done quickly, and then I'll have time for more important things. But when I look at the example of older godly mothers, I see that their home and children were their important work, their focus. And one of the young mothers recently in church here just shared that instead of waiting till quiet time is quiet, still have her quiet time, even if it isn't quiet. I think that's a big part for mothers, maybe more so than for dads. And maybe I'll just say now at the onset here, I really believe that God planned, or at least in the beginning it was the norm, that mother and father would both be at home together, raising their children, working together. we have gotten away from that as fathers since we're not all farmers or don't have a home business. And so we've gotten used to it. But that's not ideal. I really don't think it's ideal. And so we tend to think, well, let's just make sure the mothers are at home with their children. And I'd just like to emphasize that part. But I think we as fathers have an important role in making that, or in helping in that, in their role as caregivers at home. Several statements that Cheryl gives here. And mothers, if you think, yeah, it says peaceful there. Just something to work toward. But she says a peaceful home. She was talking about the balance, or I say it should be a balance. Sometimes you do juggling, and I think for all of us parents, it goes along with anybody who's caring for children. I think they're some of the best jugglers in the world, and I hand that off to mothers especially, because you're juggling a lot of things, and you don't juggle one ball. I don't think that's called juggling, but when there are at least two, and it's difficult for various reasons, because concentration needs to be continuous. But a peaceful home. So instead of just wishing I could be in this ministry, or that would be just so much more valuable to God than being stuck here where I'm at. There's something very powerful about a home with children. And a peaceful home is an oasis for hurting people. And few things are as refreshing and beautiful as children who are loved and trained up in the ways of God. Okay, you're going to say, oh, here it is again, an orderly, happy home. An orderly, happy home is a powerful witness for our communities, to our communities. And it is one way truth is propagated. And I don't think she's talking about propagation of children. I think she's making the statement that we are showing the world, we're showing unbelievers that God's way works, and that's very powerful. It is not a choice between family or ministry, but rather family is ministry, and together we can minister to others. Just make it where you can, take them with you as you serve God. It's another article that I read, I'm not sure where it was, another magazine, about this lady who went to visit their neighbors. And they had just moved to this place, and they went, I don't know if she had some bread or some baked goods, and she wanted to visit just to get to know their neighbors, and this one place was bad. All the rest of the neighbors said, you don't go there, that's too bad. And so she said, well, she was telling the story then in her article, said she remembered what her mom had done, something very similar, and took all of the children with them. And so this lady had her experience as a child going to this bad home and making connections with this, I can't remember the circumstances, but making connections with these people that no one else bothered to connect with. And this lady did this again in her as an adult, and was able to minister to these people who no one else would reach out to them. You know, it was a situation where you don't know which door to go to. And she probably had reasons to question her safety, but God was with her, and she was able to minister to her neighbors on an ongoing way. Then she says, Cheryl says this, in these busy years, it is easy to feel overwhelmed and discouraged with the daily responsibilities. But God sees the big picture of what is being accomplished. It is infinitely more glorious than the messy floors and hungry tummies that I see. He sees the souls being birthed and raised, each one as a potential soldier in his kingdom. He sees what is doing in our hearts as we learn to unselfishly give to our families. He is actively involved, even when all I can see is a challenge of today. He is actively involved when all I can see is the challenge of today. Then a quote by Elizabeth Elliot. The process of shaping the child shapes also the mother herself. Reverence for her sacred burden calls her to all that is pure and good, that she may teach primarily by her own humble daily example. If you wish you had a career, remember that I have to think about that sometimes. And just the fact that, I'm not quite sure, I think might have this somewhere else, but sometimes you maybe wonder, is this all I'm doing? You know, there can be, things get pretty messy, literally. And I, for one, don't necessarily enjoy cleaning up vomit. My nose isn't quite as sensitive as it was at one time, but I would always be afraid that I might add to it. And but there's some other perspectives that I have to think about. I thought about as I was studying this, and I'm pretty sure it happened at Caleb and Rebecca's crossroad close to their house. I'm pretty sure I experienced it. I think I talked with Caleb about it. But one morning when I crossed that intersection every morning and afternoon, one morning at 4:30, I crossed there. There were flashing lights, and I think as I crossed, there was a car sitting just right beside the road in their yard, and to the left of the car in their yard was a blanket. I think there was even a blanket, and there were some people sitting on the blanket. And Caleb, you remember that? Don't you? Okay. They have too many happening there. But I think there was somebody. It was a mother who was going to work, and these mothers have to drop their children off at a child care place. This was at 4:30 in the morning, and so they were involved in an accident. And there they were sitting. They were safe, but they were sitting in some stranger's yard at 4:30 in the morning. I guess mothers, next time you have to get up at an unearthly hour in the morning with your children, just be grateful that you're not sitting in somebody's yard because of a car accident. There are a lot of unglamorous things about careers that are often overlooked, and there's no one else better. And this doesn't mean that you're perfect, but there's no one else better able to care for your children than you, father and mother. God has given them to you for a purpose, and God will help you to be able to do that. And I just bless you and encourage you as you do that. The nurture and vocation. This is more to us men. Our vocation, whether an hourly job or our own business, should be servant to our highest calling, which is nurturing our family. You could say, well, is that our highest calling? Isn't my highest calling to God? It is, but I really believe our relationship with our spouse and our nurturing our family. Those two should be right up there. That's the highest calling that we have on earth. It's taking for granted that we are a servant of God, but that's the highest calling, and they should be. Our job, our vocation should be servant to our highest calling. I believe our livelihood should enable our wives to be full-time caregiver to our children. One thing that the pandemic made obvious was that some people discovered that they could be financially, or it's just as financially viable for the mother to stay at home and care for the children than it is to put them in child care. Now, that doesn't mean that every mother that's staying at home taking care of her children is a good mother. And it kind of goes the other side, speaking out the other side of the mouth, what I just said about that you parents are the best people for your children. It doesn't mean that we parents are always perfect. But a parent that has a desire to and seeks to grow in their parenting skills, God will honor that, and God will bless you in that. I remember, and I don't know if this couple had children or not. This is when before I was 20. We were working on a house in a new development, and the house next door was built already. And there was this, every noon that the man would come home for lunch. So maybe he was complaining about, we overheard him telling his wife, and she didn't really seem like a very energetic person, and he was tired of hot dogs and beans, and that was what he said. And I don't recall if they had children or not. So that's the other side of it. You can be lazy, or we can be lazy, whether we're mother or father, or any role in nurturing children. But God really wants us to do our best, and our livelihood should enable our wives to be full-time caregivers to our children, because they have a knowledge of our children like no one else has. Providing financial at the expense of providing emotionally and spiritually for our families will cost us in the end. We, as dads, probably more than our wives, feel the weight of providing, just making sure that the bills are paid, we have a place we have a house, we have food on the table, we have something to drive, and things are in decent shape. We have that. And so, payments are due off usually at a certain day of the month. And so we have to get those things done. Some of these other needs, providing emotionally and spiritually for a family, are the due date isn't as obvious. But I'm proposing that the bills for these needs, emotional and spiritual needs, aren't due on a certain day of the month like financial needs, but are best paid on a daily basis. And I don't know about you, dads, but that has always been a difficult one for me, and it still is. It still is. I remember when I was probably still a teenager, and my oldest sister and her husband got involved in some sales organization, and it wasn't Amway, but it's kind of a small version of it. And they had a sales pitch at our house, mom and dad's house, and somehow they really wanted me to be there. And I was one of those guys who were sitting in the background I'm sure I had a frown on my face. I was not happy to be there. But I remember them saying this, and this isn't verbatim, but pretty close. Your children might suffer for the time being with you being involved in the company, going for meetings or rallies or parties, but it will be worth it in the long run. I don't think I shook my head literally, but as a teenager, I was thinking, that's not right. That's not right. There's just something about, and this is part of juggling and the balance of caring financially and caring emotionally and spiritually for our family. There's a certain stage in life where those bills those emotional and spiritual bills don't seem like they're due, but you better pay them. You better pay them then. Don't wait to pay them until you have a nice house. They won't be there to pay at that time, or you will pay drastically. So arrange your life to be able to care for and nurture your children, and it literally takes that. Okay, nurture and everyday life. I had to think of the verses in Deuteronomy 6 where Moses said, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one Lord, and thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart and with all thy soul and with all thy might." That is number one. "And these words which I command thee this day shall be in thine heart, and thou shalt teach them diligently unto thy children, and thou shalt talk of them when thou sittest in thine house, and when thou drivest down the road, or walkest by the way, and when thou liest down, and when thou risest up." There's just no other. It has to be intertwined with our daily life. We can't just say, okay, now I'm going to do. Well, we can do things on a specific time, have family devotions and things like that. But everything has to be intertwined with our life. And what we say, what we do, it has to be intertwined. And that's the best way to teach. Okay, show and tell. Susan gave the example of, she was telling this story to one of her grandchildren, and I don't know all the story, but she was disobedient. And something happened that she spilled hot gravy on her foot. And she said she could see the wheels turning in her granddaughter's mind. She said, and she doesn't think it was just because she was pushing off bedtime. Obviously, her granddaughter was staying at their place for the night. And she was pretty sure that the next morning she could hear her granddaughter say, "Grandma, can I see it? Can I see the scar on your toe?" And then she talked about Delbert did this when he tucked their boys in at bed. He would tell them stories about when he was a boy, and he grew up in Paraguay after they moved down there when he was 6th grade, I think, and they lived a frontier's life. And so the boys would ask him for a story, or he would tell them stories, and finally they asked him tell us the one about frog or turtle. She said they started asking about specific stories, and usually it was about the ones that when they were disobedient and when something bad happened. But she's just saying that is a tremendous way for us to talk about consequences, or to tell them about consequences. Just let them know. Just let them know what happens, because there are so many things that we're not old enough. We don't get old enough to learn everything ourselves. And children, if you want to save some time in life, just learn from history. Too many people don't learn from history, and you can say, "Oh, I'm better than that." Usually things come around and people do the same thing. So, and be open about bad choices. She gave the story about, I think it's when they were still living here in the Napanee area, that there was some wedding going on in their neighborhood, and I think this couple had to get married because the girlfriend was pregnant, and so they talked about it with their children. Said, what is appropriate, talk about And she gave the example about a couple that had happened to them, and they were willing to be open with their children, and at an appropriate time talk about that to them. And that's, it's one of the ways that God is able to use bad things in our lives to be redemptive. And it's humbling, but it is also, it brings glory to God when we can say that God has forgiven us from this. And it makes a tremendous impact on our children's lives. So be faithful. Be a faithful steward of the heritage God has given to you. And I had to think of one other verse in Galatians 6:9. Says, and let us, I don't think it's talking about parenting or caring for children, but it works. Let us not be weary in well-doing, for in due season we shall reap if we faint not. You wonder why God gives children to young people? Well, just ask any grandparent. They're usually glad to send them home after a certain amount of time. God should give, you'd think God should give children to those with experience, but I guess the experience we can get is from the stories that you tell your children, and they have their parents' experience to go on. So I know you wanted to see some more pictures, so here they are again, and I know it's pretty small up there. This is from the field trip, can't see anybody. This is room 1. We even see a couple mothers in there, I think. Must have been first day. Room 3 or 2. I don't have room 3. This is from the field trip. This is one of the best ones. Field trip. So no matter where you are in caring for children, we're working with eternal souls, and God has so much in store for every one of them and each one of us. Let's bow our heads for prayer.